Justin Turner, a black teenager, is wrongfully targeted and humiliated by Officer Derek Miller while leaving a mall. The incident, caught on video, goes viral, sparking national outrage and protests against racial profiling. Justin's father, David, a police captain, leads the fight for justice, despite facing resistance from the police department. After rejecting a settlement offer, the Turners take the case to trial, where Miller is found guilty. The trial sparks a movement for systemic change, and Justin, though initially reluctant, emerges stronger, ready to continue advocating for justice and equality in the face of adversity. Welcome to today's story. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next exciting stories. Let's enjoy. Justin Turner stood at the corner of the street, his hands deep in his pockets, gripping the few bills he had managed to save over the last few months. The sun was starting its slow descent behind the row of apartment buildings, casting long shadows on the pavement as the afternoon gave way to early evening. It was a beautiful day, one that should have felt light, but Justin was carrying a weight that had been building in him for weeks. Today was important. It wasn't just about the gift. It was about what it symbolized. For a long time, Justin had been thinking about how to show his mother how much she meant to him. It wasn't that she demanded gifts or expected grand gestures. Mary Turner was a modest woman, content with the love of her family. But Justin had saved up for months to buy her something special. A watch. Not just any watch, but one he had seen weeks ago, sitting in the display window of a jewelry store in the upscale part of town. It was the kind of watch that seemed too fancy for his neighborhood, something elegant and timeless, just like his mother. His father, Captain David Turner, had always emphasized the importance of showing gratitude, of expressing love, especially to the people who gave everything for you. Mary Turner had given everything for her family, and Justin knew he hadn't always made it easy for her. His teenage years had been marked by the usual rebellion, the pulling away, the sharpness in his tone that he regretted as soon as the words left his mouth. This watch was his way of saying, "Thank you, I love you, I'm sorry." The streets of his neighborhood were familiar, comfortable. He knew the people who passed him by, nodding as they exchanged quick greetings. But as Justin walked toward the bus stop that would take him to the mall on the other side of town, the comfortable sense of belonging began to fade. The further he went from home, the more he felt the shift in atmosphere. The trees were taller, the buildings grander, and the people were different. Their clothes were cleaner, their strides more confident. Justin kept his head high, though. His father had taught him well. No matter where you are, walk like you belong, because you do. Still, as the bus rumbled down the streets toward the more affluent side of town, Justin couldn't help but feel a knot of nervousness tighten in his stomach. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. He had plenty of it, but the watch he planned to buy weighed heavily on his mind. He hoped it was still there. It had taken him months to save up enough for it, and today was his mother's birthday. He couldn't go home empty-handed. The bus ride seemed longer than usual. Justin stared out the window, watching as the buildings became more spaced out, the streets wider and cleaner. He always felt out of place when he ventured into this part of town, but today was different. Today he was on a mission. He was going to get the perfect gift for his mother, and nothing was going to stop him. As the bus pulled to a stop outside the mall, Justin stepped off, adjusting the straps of his worn-out backpack. The mall was massive, a sprawling complex of glass and steel, filled with people who seemed to move with purpose and ease. Justin walked inside, his eyes scanning the brightly lit corridors, the rows of stores filled with expensive clothes, shoes, and jewelry. He knew exactly where he was headed. The jewelry store was tucked away in a corner of the mall, its polished windows gleaming under the soft lighting. Justin had passed by it a dozen times before, but today was the first time he'd actually step inside. He could feel the eyes of the clerk on him as soon as he entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. She watched him carefully, her gaze following him as he approached the glass counter where the watch sat, nestled among a collection of delicate jewelry and timepieces. Justin could feel the weight of her scrutiny, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He was here for his mother. He pointed to the watch. "I'd like to see that one, please." The clerk hesitated, her eyes flicking over Justin's appearance before retrieving the watch from the display. She handed it to him with a practiced smile. but Justin could sense the subtle judgment in her eyes. He had gotten used to that look. People assuming they knew who he was because of the color of his skin or the way he dressed. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. Justin turned the watch over in his hands, examining it carefully. It was even more beautiful up close. The silver band catching the light just right. It was perfect. His mother would love it. He handed it back to the clerk. "I'll take it." The clerk raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but said nothing as she rang up the purchase. Justin handed her the cash, grateful that he had enough to cover it. As she handed him the neatly wrapped box, Justin felt a sense of pride. He had worked hard for this moment, and now it was finally real. He slipped the box into his backpack and thanked the clerk before heading back into the mall. For the first time that day, he felt lighter, his mission accomplished. He could already picture his mother's smile when she opened the gift. It would all be worth it. But as Justin made his way toward the exit, the knot in his stomach returned. There was something unsettling about the way people were looking at him, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled suspicion. He kept his head down, walking quickly toward the doors, eager to leave. That's when he heard the voice. "Hey, you, stop right there!" Justin's heart dropped into his stomach as the voice echoed through the crowded mall. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the sea of faces until they landed on a police officer making his way toward him. The officer, a tall man with a stocky build and a face set in a permanent scowl, was walking with purpose, his hand resting on the baton at his hip. Justin froze. His mind raced, trying to figure out what he could have done wrong. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't even done anything suspicious. But the way the officer was looking at him, like he was already guilty of something, made Justin's mouth go dry. "What's in the bag?" the officer asked, his tone sharp and demanding. Justin blinked, his confusion deepening. "It's just a watch," he said, his voice steady but nervous. The officer didn't seem to care. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he stared down at Justin. "Show me." Justin hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the people who had stopped to watch. Their eyes were filled with curiosity, some with concern, but no one stepped forward. They just watched, waiting to see what would happen next. "I didn't do anything wrong," Justin said, his voice a little stronger this time. "I bought it from the store. I have the receipt." The officer's eyes flicked over him again, and Justin could feel the weight of his judgment. He wasn't just being questioned because he had a bag. He was being questioned because of what he looked like. "I said, show me," the officer repeated, his voice rising in volume as he grabbed Justin's arm. The crowd around them grew tense, people whispering to each other as the scene unfolded. Justin felt the eyes of everyone on him, their silent judgment hanging in the air. He knew what was coming, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. With trembling hands, Justin reached into his bag, pulling out the small box containing the watch. He opened it, showing the officer the neatly wrapped gift inside. His breath was caught in his throat as he hoped, prayed that this would be enough to end the encounter. But it wasn't. The officer snatched the box out of his hands, throwing it to the ground. The watch tumbled out, rolling across the polished floor until it came to a stop near the officer's feet. The sound of the watch hitting the floor seemed to echo through the mall, and Justin felt a surge of anger and humiliation rising in his chest. He had worked so hard to buy that watch. He had done nothing wrong, and yet here he was, being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of strangers. The officer kicked the watch aside, his expression cold and dismissive. "Empty your pockets," he ordered, his voice laced with authority. Justin's hands shook as he complied, turning his pockets inside out to show that he had nothing to hide. But it didn't matter. The officer wasn't interested in the truth. When the search was over, the officer gave Justin one last look of disdain before walking away without another word. "Be more careful next time," he muttered, as if he were doing Justin a favor by letting him go. Justin stood there, his breath shallow, his face burning with shame. The people around him began to disperse, their curiosity satisfied. No one stepped forward to help. No one said a word. It was over, but Justin knew that the damage had already been done. He bent down, picking up the crumpled watch from the floor, his hands trembling with anger and frustration. He felt like he had been stripped of something, his dignity, his worth, and there was nothing he could do to get it back. The knot in his stomach tightened as he walked out of the mall. the watch clutched tightly in his hand. The world around him blurred as he fought back the tears that threatened to spill over. He wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not now. But the weight of what had just happened pressed down on him, and Justin knew that his life would never be the same. The walk back home felt endless. Justin's legs moved on autopilot, his mind racing with fragments of the encounter. The officer's cold, emotionless eyes, the way the crowd had watched, silent witnesses to his humiliation. In the watch, the precious gift he had picked out for his mother is now damaged and crumpled in his backpack. Justin's body felt heavy, his muscles taut with the stress he hadn't yet released. The neighborhood was familiar, yet today it felt foreign. He passed the same trees, the same buildings, the same corner store where he used to buy snacks after school. But everything was muted, distant, like he was seeing it all through a thick fog. The further he walked, the more the encounter replayed in his mind. Each step brought a new wave of shame, a fresh sting of anger. As he reached his home, Justin hesitated on the porch, staring at the front door. Inside was the warmth of his family, his mother's smile, his sister's laughter, the steady presence of his father. But today, Justin wasn't sure if he could face them. He wasn't ready to tell his father, Captain David Turner, the man who had always stood for justice and fairness, that his son had been treated like a criminal. And what about his mother? How could he explain the crushed gift, the one he had worked so hard for, without breaking her heart? Taking a deep breath, Justin opened the door. The familiar sound of his mother cooking greeted him. The smell of her famous roast filled the air, and for a moment it comforted Justin. But the comfort was fleeting, quickly replaced by the weight of the unspoken. "Justin!" his mother called from the kitchen, her voice filled with the usual warmth. "Is that you?" "Yeah, Mom, it's me." His voice cracked slightly, and he quickly cleared his throat, hoping she wouldn't notice. Mary Turner appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face lit up when she saw him, the way it always did. "How was your day, sweetheart? Did you find everything you needed?" Justin nodded, forcing a smile. "I got it." "Good, I can't wait to see what you picked out," she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Your father's going to be home soon, and then we can start dinner." "Great," Justin replied, his voice hollow. He shifted the backpack on his shoulder, hiding the crushed watch box deep inside. "I'm just going to go to my room for a bit. I'm tired." His mother looked at him closely, her mother's intuition sensing that something was off. But she didn't press him. "All right, but don't stay up there too long. Dinner's almost ready." Justin nodded and quickly headed upstairs, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel her eyes on him as he walked away, but he couldn't bear to look back. Not yet. Once inside his room, Justin dropped his backpack on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. His mind was a mess of tangled thoughts. He wanted to forget what had happened at the mall, but the memory clung to him like a shadow. He could still feel the officer's grip on his arm, the cold judgment in his eyes. He had been powerless. And the worst part was that he knew there was nothing he could have done to change the outcome. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface all day. His fists clenched at his sides, and he let out a frustrated groan. How could this happen to him? How could someone just decide in an instant that he was guilty, that he didn't belong? The knock on his door made him sit up abruptly. "Justin!" It was his father's voice, deep and steady, the same voice that had reassured him countless times before. Justin's heart raced. He wasn't ready to talk to his father about what had happened, but he couldn't ignore him either. "Come in, Dad." David Turner stepped into the room, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the dim light. Dressed in his police uniform, he looked every bit the man Justin had always admired. Strong, confident, a pillar of authority in both their home and the community. But tonight, Justin couldn't meet his father's eyes. "How was your day, son?" David asked, his voice calm but filled with the usual authority. Justin hesitated. He wanted to lie, to say everything had been fine. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just shrugged. David's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing that something was wrong. He took a step closer, sitting down on the edge of Justin's bed. "You all right? You seem off." Justin swallowed hard, his throat tight. He knew he couldn't hide this from his father. David had always been able to read him, even when Justin thought he could keep things hidden. "Something happened today," Justin finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. David's posture stiffened. "What happened?" Justin took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I was at the mall buying Mom's gift, and this cop, he stopped me. He grabbed me, threw the gift on the ground, and treated me like I was some kind of criminal." David's face darkened, the lines around his mouth tightening. Justin shook his head, the frustration bubbling up again. "I don't know. He didn't explain. He just saw me and decided I was guilty. I don't know. I didn't belong there." For a long moment, David didn't say anything. His jaw was clenched, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and something else. Something deeper, something Justin had never seen in his father before. "Did he hurt you?" David asked, his voice low, controlled. "No, but it wasn't about that," Justin replied, his voice shaking with emotion. "It was the way he looked at me, like I was less than. I didn't matter." David stood up, his movements sharp and deliberate. He paced the room, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I'm going to take care of this," he said finally, his voice hard. "No one does that to my son, not without consequences." Justin looked up at his father, surprised by the intensity in his voice. He had always known David to be a man of action, someone who didn't tolerate injustice. But this was different. This was personal. "Dad, it's fine," Justin said quickly, trying to defuse the situation. "I'm okay. It's over." But David shook his head, his eyes blazing with anger. "It's not over, Justin. This is just the beginning. I'm going to make sure that officer faces the consequences for what he did." Justin's stomach twisted with anxiety. He didn't want this to turn into something bigger. He just wanted to forget about it, to move on. But he knew his father. Once David set his mind on something, there was no stopping him. "Please, Dad," Justin pleaded, his voice soft. "Don't make this worse." David stopped pacing, turning to face his son. His expression softened slightly, but the determination in his eyes didn't fade. "I won't let this go, Justin. You deserve better than this." Before Justin could respond, David turned and left the room, his footsteps heavy as he headed downstairs. Justin stared at the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what his father was planning, but he had a feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The next few days were tense in the Turner household. David was more focused than ever, spending long hours on the phone with colleagues, lawyers, and community leaders. He was determined to hold the officer accountable for what had happened to Justin. But as the days went by, Justin began to feel the weight of his father's crusade pressing down on him. At school, the rumors had already started to spread. Word had gotten out about what had happened at the mall, and Justin found himself at the center of unwanted attention. Some students whispered about him in the hallways, while others asked invasive questions, wanting to know every detail of the encounter. It felt like his humiliation had been put on display for everyone to see, and there was no escaping it. His mother, Mary, tried to keep things as normal as possible, but even she couldn't hide her concern. She had noticed the tension between Justin and David, though neither of them had spoken openly about it. Mary had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who could diffuse an argument with a few kind words. But this time, she wasn't sure how to bridge the growing divide between her husband and son. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the tension reached a breaking point. "Have you heard anything back from the department yet?" Mary asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. David shook his head, his expression tight. "Not yet, but they're going to hear from me soon. I'm not letting this slide." Justin, who had been pushing his food around his plate, glanced up at his father. "Dad, maybe it's time to let it go." David's eyes snapped to his son, the intensity of his gaze catching Justin off guard. "Let it go? After what happened to you?" "No, Justin, this isn't something we can just sweep under the rug." "I didn't say that," Justin replied, his voice tense. "But it's been days. I just want to move on." David slammed his hand on the table, the sound making everyone jump. "You think moving on is the answer? What happens the next time this happens to you, or to someone else? Do you want to sit back and let them get away with it?" Justin's face flushed with anger. "I'm not saying that. I don't want this to be my whole life. I don't want to be the kid who was humiliated by a cop. I want to be me. The room fell into a heavy silence. David's chest heaved with the effort of holding back his frustration, while Justin's eyes burned with unshed tears. Mary, sensing that the argument was escalating, reached out to place a hand on David's arm. David, she said gently, her voice filled with calm, maybe just needs some space to process this in his own way. David's jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on his son. Fine, but I'm not letting this go. Justin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm going to my room, he muttered before storming out of the kitchen. As the door to his room slammed shut, Mary and David sat in silence, the weight of the argument hanging heavy in the air. He's scared, David, Mary said quietly, her eyes soft with concern. He's just trying to figure out how to deal with this. David rubbed his temples, sighing deeply. I know, Mary, but I can't just let this go. If we don't fight back, nothing will ever change. I know, Mary replied, her voice soothing, but maybe fighting back means different things for the two of you. Just to try to see it from his perspective. He's only 17, and this is a lot for him to carry. David nodded, though the determination in his eyes didn't waver. I just want to protect him. I want to make sure he never has to go through this again. Mary smiled softly, reaching out to take his hand. We all want that, David, but we need to be there for him in whatever way he needs. The family dynamic had shifted. The strong, unbreakable unit they had always been felt fragile now, like cracks were forming under the surface. Justin avoided talking about the incident, hoping that if he ignored it, the pain would fade. But it never did. His father, on the other hand, became more determined each day, pushing for justice with a single-minded focus that left little room for anything else. Justin felt trapped between two worlds. One was the world where he had once lived in relative peace, going to school, hanging out with friends, and being just another teenager. The other was the new reality he found himself in, where his identity had been shaped by a single painful encounter. No matter how much he wanted to return to his old life, he knew that it was impossible. The next few days were filled with tension. Justin withdrew more and more, spending hours alone in his room, while David became consumed with his fight for justice. Mary, always calm in the storm, tried to hold the family together, but she could even feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. A week had passed since the incident at the mall, and Justin was doing his best to move on. He kept his head down at school, avoided conversations about the encounter, and tried to lose himself in his studies. But no matter how much he tried to forget, the memory clung to him. Every time he walked through the halls, he felt the weight of people's eyes on him, the whispers and side glances that followed him wherever he went. His phone buzzed one afternoon during class, and he glanced down to see a message from his friend Marcus. Yo, man, have you seen this? Attached was a link to a social media post. Justin hesitated for a moment before clicking it. His heart dropped as soon as the video started playing. It was him, standing in the mall, the police officer towering over him, demanding to see what was in his bag. The shaky phone footage captured everything: the way the officer grabbed his arm, the way the watch had been thrown to the ground, the way people had watched but done nothing. The video was already viral, shared thousands of times. Comments flooded the post with people expressing outrage at the officer's behavior, some offering words of support for Justin, while others spewed racist vitriol. Justin's stomach churned as he scrolled through the messages, feeling exposed and vulnerable. His private humiliation had been broadcast for the entire world to see. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but Justin remained frozen in his seat. His classmates filed out of the room, but he barely noticed them. His mind was racing. He had managed to keep the incident contained to a small circle of people, but now it was out there, out of control. Why did someone have to film it, he thought, his hands trembling as he stuffed his phone into his backpack. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't want to be part of some viral sensation. He didn't want people to see him like that, helpless, humiliated, powerless. As he left the classroom, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his sister, Emily. Justin, have you seen the video? It's everywhere. Justin's breath caught in his throat. If Emily had seen it, then his parents probably had too. Panic gripped him as he thought about his father's reaction. David had been laser-focused on holding the officer accountable, but Justin knew that this video would change everything. It would turn a local incident into a national conversation. He didn't want to be part of that conversation. He just wanted his life back. By the time Justin got home that afternoon, the tension in the house was palpable. He could hear his father's raised voice from the living room as soon as he walked through the door. "I don't care what the department says," David's voice boomed. "That video proves everything I've been saying. They can't sweep this under the rug now." Justin winced, setting his backpack down by the door. He knew his father had seen the video. There was no avoiding this conversation now. He stole himself before walking into the living room. David was pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, while Mary sat on the couch, her face tight with worry. Emily was nearby, scrolling through her phone, clearly anxious as well. As soon as David saw Justin, he ended the call. "Justin, did you see the video?" he asked, his voice laced with a mix of anger and concern. Justin nodded, feeling the weight of his father's gaze on him. "I saw it." David ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "This is it, Justin. This is the proof we needed. The department can't ignore this now. They'll have to take action." Justin swallowed hard. He could see the fire in his father's eyes, the same fire that had fueled him ever since the incident. But Justin didn't share his enthusiasm. "I didn't ask for this, Dad. I don't want my life out there for everyone to see." David's expression softened, but the determination didn't leave his face. "I know, son, but this is bigger than just you. That video is going to force people to pay attention. They can't turn a blind eye anymore." Justin felt the frustration bubbling up inside him. He didn't want to be the face of a movement. He didn't want to be the boy in the viral video. "I didn't want this to happen," he muttered, his voice low. David stopped pacing and looked at his son, his brow furrowed. "Justin, I get it, I do. But sometimes we don't get to choose when we fight. Sometimes the fight chooses us." Mary stood up, stepping between her husband and son, trying to mediate. "David, maybe we should take a step back for a moment. Justin's been through a lot. This is overwhelming for him." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm not trying to push him, Mary, but this is important. We can't ignore what's happening." "I'm not ignoring it," Justin snapped, his voice rising. "I just don't want to be part of it. Why can't I just move on?" The room fell silent. David stared at his son, the tension between them thickening. Mary placed a gentle hand on Justin's arm, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Justin, we know this is hard. We're all here for you." Justin pulled away, the frustration boiling over. "I'm going to my room." Without waiting for a response, he stormed out of the living room, the walls of the house feeling like they were closing in on him. He couldn't take it anymore. The pressure, the expectations, the way everyone was looking at him as if he held the answers to problems that were so much bigger than him. Once inside his room, Justin slammed the door shut and leaned against it, his chest heaving with emotion. He pulled out his phone, staring at the notifications flooding his screen. Messages from friends, classmates, people he hadn't spoken to in years. All of them wanting to know what had happened. All of them wanting to hear his side of the story. But Justin didn't have a side of the story. He just wanted to forget. The next few days passed in a blur. Justin tried to keep his head down, but it was impossible to avoid the growing attention surrounding the video. News outlets had picked up the story, airing the footage on national television. The incident sparked outrage across social media, with people from all corners of the country calling for justice. Civil rights groups began organizing protests, demanding that the police department take immediate action against Officer Miller. Justin felt like his life was spiraling out of control. Every time he opened his phone, there was a new article, a new comment, a new message. He couldn't escape it. And then came the protest. What started as a small gathering of local activists quickly grew into a citywide movement. People marched through the streets, holding signs that read, "Justice for Justin and end racial profiling." The protests were peaceful, but the energy was intense. Crowds chanted outside the police station, demanding that Officer Miller be held accountable for his actions. At first, Justin stayed far away from the protests. He watched from the sidelines, unsure of how to feel. Part of him was grateful that people were standing up for him, but another part of him wanted nothing to do with it. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He didn't want to be the face of a movement. But the protests grew louder, and soon Justin couldn't ignore them anymore. One evening, as he was scrolling through social media, he saw a post from Marcus. "Dude, you need to come out here. People are marching for you. This is your moment." Justin stared at the message, his mind racing. He hadn't wanted to be involved in the protests, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger. The people marching in the streets were doing it for more than just one incident. They were doing it for everyone who had ever been treated the way Justin had. Still, he hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to step into that role. Later that night, as Justin sat at the dinner table with his family, the tension was palpable. David had spent the day at the police station, speaking with his colleagues and pushing for an internal investigation into Officer Miller. He was exhausted, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "They're feeling the pressure," David said, his voice steady but intense. "The department can't ignore this anymore. Not with the protests, not with the media attention." Mary nodded, but her eyes flicked to Justin, sensing the turmoil inside him. "What do you think, Justin? How are you feeling about all of this?" Justin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's all happening so fast. I didn't ask for any of this." David leaned forward, his gaze serious. "I know you didn't, but this is your chance to make a difference, son. People are listening now. You have a voice." Justin swallowed hard, the weight of his father's words settling over him. "I'm just not sure I'm ready for that." David's expression softened, but the determination didn't fade. "No one's ever ready for something like this, but you've already inspired so many people just by being who you are. You don't have to carry this burden alone. We're all in this together." The next morning, Justin made his decision. The air was thick with anticipation as Justin stood on the steps of City Hall, looking out at the sea of faces gathered below. The protest had swelled to hundreds of people, their voices echoing through the streets as they demanded justice. Signs waved in the air, and the energy was electric. Justin's heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the microphone in his hand. He hadn't planned to speak, but when the organizers had handed him the mic, he knew there was no turning back. This was his moment. Taking a deep breath, Justin stepped up to the podium. The crowd quieted, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for him to speak. "I didn't ask for this," Justin began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't ask to be treated like a criminal just because of the way I look. I didn't ask for my life to be put on display for the world to see. But here we are." The crowd listened in silence, hanging on his every word. "I'm not here to be a victim," Justin continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. I'm here to stand up for the people who can't stand up for themselves." The crowd erupted in applause, but Justin wasn't done. "I'm tired of being judged for the color of my skin. I'm tired of being treated like less than a person. And I know I'm not alone. We deserve better. We deserve justice." As Justin's words echoed through the crowd, David watched from the sidelines, a mixture of pride and fear swelling in his chest. His son had taken the first step into a world that would challenge him in ways he couldn't yet understand. But David knew that Justin was strong, stronger than even he had realized. The following days were a whirlwind. After Justin's speech at City Hall, the protests gained even more momentum. What had started as a local demonstration had now turned into a national movement. News channels were running stories on the incident, showing the viral video of Justin's encounter with Officer Miller on repeat. Justin's face was everywhere, on TV, on social media, in the newspapers. People who had never met him were now rallying behind him, demanding justice not just for him, but for all victims of racial profiling and police brutality. But with the attention came resistance. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. As much as there were people who supported Justin, there were others who saw him as a threat. The comment sections of news articles and social media posts were filled with hate speech, accusations, and people defending Officer Miller. Some said Justin was making a big deal out of nothing, that the officer was just doing his job. Others claimed that Justin had exaggerated the situation to get attention. Justin tried to ignore it, but the more he read, the harder it became to shut out the negativity. It felt like no matter what he did, there would always be people who refused to believe his experience, who dismissed his pain as if it didn't matter. He had never wanted to be a symbol, but now it seemed like he had no choice. David, meanwhile, was working harder than ever. After the video went viral, the police department was forced to take action. An internal investigation had been opened into Officer Miller's conduct, but David knew that wouldn't be enough. He had seen investigations like this before, slow, bureaucratic processes that often resulted in nothing more than a slap on the wrist. He wasn't going to let that happen to his son. "I want a full investigation," David told the police chief during one of their meetings. "I want everything about Miller's history on the table. Every complaint, every report. We're going to hold him accountable for what he did." The police chief, a stern man with years of experience under his belt, looked at David with a mixture of sympathy and caution. "I understand your concerns, David, but we have to follow protocol. The investigation will take time." David shook his head, his voice firm. "Time is something we don't have. The public is demanding answers. If we don't handle this properly, it's going to explode." The chief sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I know this is personal for you, but we have to be careful. Miller's been with the department for years. He has a clean record, and there's a lot of pressure from certain groups to protect him." David's jaw tightened. He expected this, expected the department to close ranks around one of their own. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. "This isn't just about one officer," David said, his voice low but determined. "This is about what's right. And if you're not willing to do what's necessary, then I'll find someone who is." The chief raised an eyebrow. "Is that a threat?" David leaned forward, his eyes locked on the chief's. "It's a promise." As the legal process dragged on, the Turner family found themselves in the spotlight in ways they never could have imagined. Reporters camped outside their house, waiting for any new development in the case. Protesters continued to gather in the streets, their chants growing louder and more urgent. But with the attention came an unexpected set of challenges. One evening, as David was reviewing documents related to Officer Miller's history, the doorbell rang. Justin, who had been upstairs, heard his mother answer it. He listened as voices murmured downstairs, but when Mary called his name, he knew something was up. He made his way down to the living room, where he found his parents sitting with two strangers, a man and a woman, both dressed in sharp business attire. The man, tall with graying hair and an air of authority, extended his hand to Justin. "Justin Turner, I presume?" he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My name is Richard Collins. This is my colleague, Karen White. We're attorneys and we'd like to talk to you and your family about your case." Justin hesitated, glancing at his parents for reassurance. David's expression was guarded, but he nodded, signaling for Justin to sit down. "We've been following your case closely," Collins continued, his tone smooth and practiced. "It's clear that what happened to you was a gross miscarriage of justice, and we'd like to help." David folded his arms, his eyes narrowing. "Help how?" Karen, the woman beside Collins, leaned forward, her voice calm and measured. "We specialize in civil rights cases, particularly those involving police misconduct. We believe that this case has the potential to not only hold Officer Miller accountable, but also to set a legal precedent that could lead to broader reforms in the way these cases are handled." Justin's heart raced as he listened. Civil rights attorneys? Broader reforms? This was starting to sound much bigger than anything he had imagined. He had been focused on getting justice for himself, but now these people were talking about using his case to change the system. David remained skeptical. "We already have lawyers working on this. Why should we bring you in?" Collins smiled again, this time more genuine. "Because we're not just talking about one officer. We're talking about systemic change. This case is going to attract the national attention it already has. If we play our cards right, we can push for reforms that will affect not just your family, but countless others." Justin looked at his father, trying to gauge his reaction. David had always been the one to fight for justice, to demand accountability, but this was a whole new level. After a long moment of silence, David nodded slowly. "All right, let's hear what you have to say." As the legal team began to strategize, the Turner family's life became even more chaotic. Every day seemed to bring new challenges. Media interviews, meetings with attorneys, discussions about how to handle the mounting pressure from the public. Justin felt like he was being pulled in 100 different directions, and it was becoming harder and harder to keep his head above water. One afternoon, as Justin sat in the living room scrolling through his phone, Emily walked in and flopped down beside him on the couch. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Justin shrugged, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I don't know. It's just a lot." Emily nodded, understanding. Yeah, it is. But you're handling it. Am I? Justin muttered, glancing at her. Because it doesn't feel like it. You are, Emily insisted. Look at everything that's happened. People are talking about this. They're fighting for you. Justin sighed, setting his phone down. I didn't want people to fight for me. I just wanted to buy a watch for Mom and go home. Emily smiled, her eyes filled with empathy. I know, but sometimes life doesn't give us what we want. Sometimes it gives us what we need. Justin looked at his sister, surprised by her words. For someone younger than him, Emily always seemed to know exactly what to say. You should be the one giving speeches, Justin joked, trying to lighten the mood. Emily laughed. Nah, that's your job. You're the star now. Justin groaned, leaning back against the couch. I don't want to be the star. Well, too late for that, Emily teased, nudging him with her elbow. Besides, you're doing great. Mom and Dad are proud of you. I'm proud of you. Justin felt a pang of emotion in his chest. He didn't feel like he was doing great. He felt like he was barely holding it together. But hearing his sister's words gave him a small sense of reassurance. Maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. As they sat in silence, the weight of everything seemed to lift just a little. With the legal team in place, the case against Officer Miller began to pick up speed. Richard Collins and Karen White were relentless in their pursuit of justice, digging through Miller's past and uncovering a pattern of questionable behavior that had been overlooked by the department for years. There were reports of excessive force, racial profiling, and complaints from citizens that had mysteriously disappeared from the record. This is bigger than just your son, Collins told David during one of their strategy meetings. This is about a culture of impunity within the police force. We can use this case to expose that. David listened intently, his expression grim. He had always known that there were problems within the system, but seeing the evidence laid out in front of him made it all the more real. Justin, on the other hand, was struggling to keep up with the pace of the legal battle. Every day seemed to bring a new challenge, a deposition, a press conference, a meeting with the lawyers. He felt like he was constantly being pushed and pulled, with no time to process what was happening. One evening, as he sat in his room, trying to focus on his homework, his phone buzzed with a new notification. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Marcus. Yo, they're saying Miller's trying to settle. Have you heard about this? Justin frowned, his heart skipping a beat. Settle? He hadn't heard anything about a settlement. He quickly texted Marcus back. What do you mean? Marcus replied almost instantly. I saw something online. They're saying Miller's lawyer is pushing for a settlement to avoid a trial. Justin stared at the message, his mind racing. A settlement? That would mean the case wouldn't go to trial, that everything would be handled behind closed doors. It would mean that Miller wouldn't have to face public accountability for what he had done. Justin's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from his father. Justin, we need to talk, David said as soon as Justin answered. There's been a development in the case. Justin's mind was spinning as he sat across from his father at the kitchen table later that evening. The word settlement offer still rang in his ears, bouncing around his head like a thought he couldn't quite grasp. He had been preparing himself for a trial, for the idea that they would stand up in court and make Officer Miller face the consequences of his actions. But now there was this offer, an easy way out, a shortcut to avoid the long, grueling fight ahead. David sat with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed in deep thought. He had the offer on the table in front of him, a piece of paper that represented something much larger than a financial settlement. It represented a choice, one that could determine how the rest of this battle played out. They're offering a significant amount of money, David said, his voice measured. They think this will make the problem go away. Justin remained silent, staring down at the table. It wasn't about the money for him. It was never about that. So what happens if we take it? Justin finally asked. His voice was low. David leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. If we take it, the case ends here. We don't go to trial. Miller doesn't have to face the court, and this all gets wrapped up quietly. It's the department's way of protecting themselves. They want to sweep it under the rug and move on. Justin's heart sank. He had feared as much. And if we don't take it? David's expression hardened. Then we push forward with the trial. It'll be long, and it won't be easy. The media attention will get worse, and the department will fight us every step of the way. but we'll be fighting for something bigger than money. We'll be fighting for justice. Justin knew what his father wanted. He could see it in his eyes. David didn't want to take the settlement. He wanted Miller to face the full weight of the law, to be held accountable in front of the world. But Justin wasn't sure if he had the strength to keep going. The protests, the media scrutiny, the constant pressure, it was all starting to wear him down. And now this offer, dangling in front of them like a lifeline, was tempting in a way he couldn't deny. "What do you think, Mom?" Justin asked, turning to Mary, who had been quietly observing the conversation from the other side of the table. Mary's eyes softened as she looked at her son, the concern etched into her features. "I think this is your decision, Justin," she said gently. "This has affected all of us, but you've been at the center of it. Whatever you decide, we'll support you." Justin felt a lump form in his throat. His parents were putting this in his hands. It was up to him to decide what path they would take. "I don't know," Justin muttered, his voice cracking slightly. "I just want this to be over." David leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I know, son. I know you're tired. But if we take this settlement, Miller walks away with no consequences. And that's not right." Justin closed his eyes, rubbing his temples as he tried to make sense of it all. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavier than anything he had ever faced. He understood what his father was saying. Taking the settlement would mean letting Miller off the hook. But part of him just wanted to move on, to have his life back. "What about the people who are supporting us?" Justin asked quietly. "The protesters, the activists, what do we owe them?" David nodded slowly. "They're fighting for justice too. But at the end of the day, this is your life. You don't owe them your peace of mind. You have to decide what you're willing to take on." Justin's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he wanted to fight. He wanted to see Miller held accountable in front of a jury, to see the system that had wronged him laid bare for everyone to see. But on the other hand, he wanted to stop being the boy in the viral video. He wanted to go back to being Justin Turner, a teenager trying to figure out his place in the world. "I need time to think," Justin finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. David and Mary exchanged a glance before David nodded. "Take all the time you need, but we'll have to make a decision soon." The next few days were a blur of uncertainty for Justin. Everywhere he went, people seemed to be talking about the settlement offer. The news had somehow leaked, and now the media was in a frenzy, speculating on what the Turners would do. Some commentators praised the offer as a reasonable way to bring the case to a close, while others criticized it as a tactic to silence Justin and prevent systemic change. At school, Justin felt the pressure mounting. His classmates treated him differently, some with sympathy, others with a kind of awkward distance, unsure of how to talk to him. It was as if the settlement offer had turned him into an even bigger spectacle than before. "Hey man," Marcus said, sliding into the seat next to Justin at lunch. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." Justin nodded, picking at his food. "I'm just trying to figure out what to do." Marcus frowned, glancing around the cafeteria before leaning in. "About the settlement, right? I saw the news." Justin sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation settling over him. "Yeah, I don't know what the right move is." Marcus paused for a moment, his face serious. "Look, I get it, man. This whole thing's been crazy. But whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want. Don't let anyone, your dad, the media, whoever, pressure you into something you're not ready for." Justin appreciated Marcus's words, but they didn't make the decision any easier. How was he supposed to know what he wanted when everything felt so complicated? After school, Justin went for a walk to clear his head. He wandered through the neighborhood, passing the same streets he had walked so many times before. It all felt so normal, yet so far removed from the chaos his life had become. The houses, the trees, the familiar faces were like he was living in two different worlds at once. As he walked, Justin thought about the people who had shown up to support him, the protesters, the civil rights activists, the friends and neighbors who had rallied around his family. They had given so much to fight for justice, and now Justin felt like he owed them something. But he also knew that his mental and emotional health was at stake. That evening, as Justin sat in his room, staring at the ceiling, there was a knock on his door. Emily peeked her head in, her expression concerned. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. Justin nodded, sitting up as she entered the room and sat beside him on the bed. "You've been pretty quiet lately." Emily said, her voice gentle. Are you okay? Justin shrugged, not trusting himself to speak. He had always been close to his sister, but lately he felt like the weight of everything had created a distance between them. I don't know what to do, Em, Justin admitted, his voice cracking slightly. I feel like whatever I choose, it's going to be the wrong decision. Emily reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. It's not about right or wrong, Justin. It's about what you can live with. If you don't think you can handle the trial, that's okay. No one's going to judge you for that. But what if we take the settlement and nothing changes? Justin asked, his voice barely a whisper. What if Miller just walks away and we don't make any difference at all? Emily sighed, her eyes filled with understanding. That's the risk, I guess. But whatever happens, you're still making a difference. You've already made people pay attention. You've already started a conversation that's bigger than you. Justin looked at his sister, his heart swelling with gratitude. She always knew exactly what to say to make him feel better. Thanks, Em, he said quietly. I don't want to let anyone down. You won't, Emily assured him. Whatever you decide, you won't let anyone down. This is your life, Justin. You get to choose how you live it. The next morning, Justin woke up with a sense of clarity that he hadn't felt in weeks. After days of wrestling with the decision, he finally knew what he had to do. At breakfast, Justin sat down with his parents, his heart pounding in his chest. David looked up from his newspaper, sensing the seriousness in his son's expression. I've made my decision, Justin said, his voice steady. David set the paper aside, giving his full attention to his son. All right, what's it going to be? Justin took a deep breath, glancing at his mother and sister for support. I want to go to trial. I don't want to take the settlement. David's eyes widened slightly, but a flicker of pride crossed his face. Are you sure? This won't be easy. I know, Justin replied, his voice firm, but I don't want Miller to walk away without facing the consequences. I don't want to let this just disappear. Mary smiled softly, reaching out to take Justin's hand. We're with you, no matter what. David nodded, his expression serious but proud. This is a brave decision, son. It's going to be a tough fight, but I believe we can win. Justin felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. He knew the road ahead would be hard, but he was ready to fight. With the decision made, the Turners prepared themselves for the battle ahead. The legal team ramped up their efforts, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing for what promised to be a contentious trial. The media attention only intensified, with news outlets covering every new development in the case. Justin found himself back in the spotlight, but this time, he felt more confident in his role. He wasn't just the boy in the viral video anymore. He was someone who was fighting for justice, for himself and for everyone who had been in his shoes. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued him before began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. The trial was set to begin in a few weeks, and the anticipation was palpable. Protests continued to grow, with more and more people joining the movement for police reform. The energy in the air was electric, a sense that something big was about to happen. As the trial date approached, Justin's family rallied around him, offering their unwavering support. Emily was always there to crack a joke when the stress became too much, and Mary made sure that their home remained a place of comfort and peace, despite the chaos swirling around them. David, too, was a pillar of strength, though Justin could see the toll the fight was taking on him. The long hours, the media scrutiny, the pressure from the police department all weighed heavily on him. But David never wavered in his belief that they were doing the right thing. And Justin knew that, no matter what happened, they would face it together. The day of the trial arrived, and the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The room was packed with reporters, activists, legal teams, and curious spectators, all eager to witness what promised to be one of the most significant legal battles the city had seen in years. Justin sat beside his parents, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His heart pounded in his chest, but he did his best to maintain a calm exterior. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for, the moment where everything would finally come to a head. David sat beside him, his face set in a stern, focused expression. He had spent years in this courtroom as a police officer, but today was different. Today he wasn't there to uphold the law. He was there to fight for his son. Justin's attorney, Richard Collins, stood up as the judge entered the room. The gavel came down, signaling the start of the trial. Officer Derek Miller sat across from them at the defense table, his expression calm and composed, as if he hadn't done anything wrong. Justin's stomach churned with anger just looking at him. He had waited months for this moment, and now it was finally here. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Collins began, his voice strong and confident. "Today, you are going to hear the story of a young man who was wrongfully targeted, humiliated, and violated because of the color of his skin. You are going to hear how Officer Derek Miller, a man sworn to protect and serve, abused his power to harass an innocent teenager, my client, Justin Turner." Justin sat up straighter, his eyes fixed on the attorney as he spoke. Collins's words filled the room with a sense of righteous indignation, painting a clear picture of what had happened that day at the mall. He explained how Justin had been doing nothing more than buying a gift for his mother when he was stopped, questioned, and treated like a criminal, all because of a deeply ingrained bias in the officer's mind. On the other side of the courtroom, Miller's attorney, a sharp-looking man named Frank Milton, rose to give his opening statement. Milton took a different approach, focusing on Miller's years of service and clean record. He painted Justin as a young man who had overreacted to a routine police encounter, suggesting that the situation had been blown out of proportion by the media. "Officer Miller acted in accordance with his training," Milton said confidently. "He approached the situation with caution, as any reasonable officer would, and was met with resistance. This was not an act of racial profiling. It was an act of a police officer doing his job in a high-pressure situation." Justin clenched his fists under the table, feeling a wave of anger wash over him. Resistance? He hadn't resisted. He had done everything Miller asked, and yet he was still treated like a criminal. But he kept his composure, knowing that the truth would come out in the testimony. The prosecution's first witness was Justin himself. As he took the stand, he could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. The eyes of the jury, the judge, the reporters, and the public were all on him, waiting to hear his story. Justin took a deep breath, reminding himself of what his sister had said. "This is your story. You're in control." Collins guided him through his testimony with careful questions, allowing Justin to describe in detail what had happened that day at the mall. He spoke about how he had saved up for months to buy the watch for his mother, how excited he had been to finally give her the gift, and how all of that joy had been crushed the moment Officer Miller approached him. "I didn't understand why he was stopping me," Justin said, his voice steady but emotional. "I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just a kid trying to buy a present for my mom." Collins nodded, encouraging Justin to continue. "And what happened next?" "He grabbed me," Justin said, his voice growing firmer. "He threw my bag on the ground and kicked the watch. He didn't care about the truth. He just saw me and decided I was guilty." The courtroom was silent, the tension building with every word Justin spoke. Collins allowed a moment of quiet before continuing. "And how did that make you feel?" he asked softly. Justin hesitated, his throat tightening. He had been dreading this question, but he knew it was important. "It made me feel powerless. I didn't matter. No matter what I did, he would never see me as anything but a criminal." A murmur spread through the courtroom as the weight of Justin's words settled over the jury. Collins gave him a supportive nod before stepping back. The defense, however, was ready to attack. When Milton rose for his cross-examination, his questions were sharp and calculated. "Mr. Turner," Milton began, his tone almost patronizing, "you say that Officer Miller threw your bag on the ground. But isn't it true that you were acting suspiciously when he approached you?" Justin blinked, taken aback. I wasn't acting suspiciously. I was just walking out of the store." Milton's eyes narrowed. "But you admit that you hesitated when Officer Miller asked to see what was in your bag. Why didn't you comply immediately?" "I did comply," Justin insisted, his voice rising slightly. "I showed him the watch, but that wasn't enough for him. He was treating me like I was guilty from the start." Milton continued to press, trying to paint Justin as someone who had escalated the situation. But Justin held his ground, refusing to be swayed by the defense's attempts to twist his words. When his testimony was over, Justin stepped down from the stand, his heart pounding in his chest. He had done his best, but he couldn't help feeling a sense of unease. The defense was going to do everything they could to discredit him, to make him look like the villain in his own story. The defense's star witness, of course, was Officer Miller. As he took the stand, he looked calm and composed, as if he believed he was on the right. Justin watched him closely, his stomach churning with a mixture of anger and frustration. Milton wasted no time in framing Miller as a dedicated officer who had only been doing his job. He asked Miller about his years of service, his commendations, and his clean record, painting a picture of a man who had been unfairly targeted by a media frenzy. "Officer Miller, can you tell the court why you approached Mr. Turner that day?" Milton asked. Miller nodded, his voice calm and measured. "I saw a young man leaving a store, and something about his behavior seemed off. He looked nervous, like he was trying to avoid attention. In my experience, that kind of behavior often signals that something's not right." "And what did you do?" Milton asked. "I approached him and asked to see what was in his bag," Miller said simply. "I was just doing my job, trying to ensure that there was no threat to public safety." Milton smiled, turning to the jury as if to say, "See? It was all just a misunderstanding." But Collins wasn't going to let Miller get away with his version of the story. When he stood up for his cross-examination, his questions were direct and piercing. "Officer Miller, you say that Justin Turner was acting suspiciously. What exactly was he doing that made you think he was a threat?" Miller hesitated, his expression tightening. "He was walking quickly, avoiding eye contact." Collins raised an eyebrow. "So walking quickly and avoiding eye contact is enough to make someone a suspect?" Miller shifted in his seat. "It's part of the job to notice those things. Would you have stopped a white teenager doing the same thing?" Collins asked, his voice sharp. Miller's face reddened. "I treat everyone the same." Collins leaned forward, his eyes locked on Miller's. "Do you? Because it seems to me that you saw a young black man, assumed he was guilty, and acted accordingly. Isn't that true?" Miller sputtered, trying to regain his composure. "I was following protocol." "Protocol?" Collins echoed, his voice incredulous. "Is it protocol to throw a young man's belongings on the ground? To kick a gift meant for his mother? To humiliate him in front of a crowd of people?" Miller's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Collins let the silence hang in the air for a moment before stepping back. No further questions. As the trial neared its conclusion, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Both sides had made their cases, and now it was up to the jury to decide whether Officer Miller would be held accountable for his actions. Justin sat beside his family, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been through so much, months of protests, media attention, legal battles, and now everything hinged on what the jury would decide. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, but Justin could see the worry in David's eyes. They had fought so hard to get to this point, but there was no guarantee of victory. The jury deliberated for hours, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, the courtroom was called back to order. The judge entered and the jury filed in, their faces solemn. Justin's breath caught in his throat as the foreman stood up to deliver the verdict. "In the case of Justin Turner versus Officer Derek Miller, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A wave of relief crashed over Justin as the words sunk in. Guilty. Officer Miller had been found guilty. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and gasps. The reporters scrambled to get the news out, while activists hugged each other in celebration. David gripped Justin's shoulder, his face breaking into a rare smile. Mary wiped away tears of relief, and Emily threw her arms around Justin, laughing through her own tears. It was over. Officer Miller had been held accountable for his actions. Justice had been served. In the days following the verdict, Justin's life began to return to some semblance of normalcy. The media attention slowly faded, the protests quieted down, and for the first time in months, Justin felt like he could breathe again. The trial had been grueling, but it had been worth it. Miller's conviction wasn't just a personal victory for Justin. It was a victory for everyone who had been fighting for change. The case had sparked a national conversation about racial profiling and police misconduct, and reforms were already being discussed at both the local and national levels. The Turners had become unlikely symbols of that change, and while the spotlight was intense, they were proud of what they had accomplished. One afternoon, as Justin sat on the porch with his family, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, David turned to him. "I'm proud of you, son," he said quietly. Justin smiled, feeling a sense of peace washed over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had control over his own story. "Thanks, Dad," Justin replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." David nodded, but there was something more in his eyes, a mixture of pride and relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "You've got a bright future ahead of you," David said. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Justin looked out at the horizon, the world stretched out before him, full of possibilities. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready for whatever came next. Weeks after the trial, life for Justin Turner had started to settle into a new normal. The media attention had mostly died down, and while people still recognized him, it no longer felt overwhelming. The movement that had begun with his story continued to grow, with activists and community leaders pushing for reforms across the country. Justin knew that his battle had sparked something bigger than himself, and though his personal fight was over, the work for justice would continue. As he walked through his neighborhood, now more familiar and comforting than it had been in months, Justin felt lighter. He was no longer defined by the incident that had brought him unwanted attention. He was simply Justin again, older, stronger, and wiser for what he had endured. Later that evening, as Justin sat at his desk, looking out the window at the fading light, he thought about how far he had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. He had found his voice, fought for justice, and won. Not just for himself, but for countless others who had been in his shoes. With a deep breath, Justin turned to his computer, ready to record a message for the people who had followed his journey. He opened a new video file and pressed the record. "Hey everyone," Justin began, his voice calm and steady. "I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for standing with me, for supporting me, and for believing that we could make a difference." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "This journey has been tough, but it's also shown me the power of community. Together we can fight for what's right and make sure that justice is served, not just for me, but for everyone who has been wronged." Justin smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. "The fight isn't over. There's still work to be done, but I'm hopeful for the future, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you who stood by me through it all." He reached forward and clicked to add the final message on the screen. "Join us in the fight for a better world." As the subscribe button appeared on the screen, Justin felt a sense of closure. This chapter of his life was coming to an end, but a new one was just beginning. He smiled, knowing that the story didn't end here.